Welcome to the Andy Staples Show. It's a Dear Andy edition. You ask, I answer. And as always, you guys have some great questions. I've put out the call. We've done it on the Athletic website, we've done it on Twitter, and we're going to mix it up. We got this podcast version of it. We've got the written version of it, which will be completely different questions and will include a random ranking. Not going to have a random ranking tonight because we have a very interesting barbecue related question that I've got to get to that I feel like I probably need to take a little time on to explain the answer to. But first, we got to get to some college football questions. Obviously, there's one burning topic this week in college football, and that has been the focus of almost every question I've gotten, which, listen, it's a wild situation, so I understand completely. This one comes from @WileyEDog on Twitter. If a program were to be unhappy with their coach in late February, would they be better off keeping that coach until the season, firing the coach now and hiring an interim, or firing the coach now and hiring from a limited pool, asking for some friends down south? And so what Wiley means in terms of firing and hiring an interim or hiring from a limited pool, the limited pool one would be a permanent replacement, not someone who would be the coach for 2022 and then you move on and do a full search at the end of next season. So obviously this is about Auburn. And I think Auburn has sort of telegraphed what's going to happen with Bryan Harsin. We don't know exactly how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, but it's probably coming sooner rather than later when the president gets up on Friday at the trustees meeting and says they're trying to separate fact from fiction and they'll come to a decision. And they put out a statement on Monday talking about what they're investigating, that they're asking players and coaches what's going on in the program, and that they will come to a decision. The fact that you've admitted there's a decision to be made means you're going to move on. So now it's just a matter of how you do that, how much of the $18 million buyout you wind up paying. That's really the crux of that issue. So Wiley's question sort of spins this forward, and I think that's probably where we need to be looking forward now. And it's an interesting question because I think my instinct was to say you would go interim, like say you appoint Cadillac Williams head coach in this situation, and you have him coach this season. And if he's great, then you keep him. And if he's not, then you do a full search after next season. Keeping the coach, I don't think is an option now. I think Auburn has sort of blown that out of the water. Some of the stuff that's been done behind, on the internet, and as we have not mentioned certain things, certain rumors that have been going around. There's no verification of any of that stuff. I'm not going to talk about it unless we can verify that. And I realize you guys have had some fun with this on the internet, but these are real people. These are their personal lives. So I'm not getting into that. And the way this has been fought by whoever is trying to get Bryan Harsin out of there, it's not pretty. And I don't know. I don't know how you come back from all of this if you're Bryan Harsin when clearly they don't want you. And honestly, if I'm Bryan Harsin and I know I haven't done anything wrong, I'm going, give me my $18 million. So I wouldn't want to be back there because they clearly have decided they're done with him. So what do? I talked to somebody earlier this week who's hired football coaches before, and they had an interesting take on this. And they've not hired in February or in a non-traditional hiring time. They've had to hire when everything was going. And they said it might actually be better to try to hire in February. And the reason being, there's not a bunch of stuff flying around, like from this AD who has a job open or this agent who's trying to position their candidate for a different job. There's not as much misinformation. You are aware of who's really interested and who's using you for leverage, because you really can't be used for leverage except against the current school that the person's at. And if you happen to know somebody there, then you can probably figure out what that person's status is and how much leverage they can get. So, you think about some of the more recent ones where this has happened. I think Michigan State 2 years ago is probably the best example, where Mark D'Antonio dips out right around signing day, the February signing day, and leaving Michigan State without a coach, and they had to figure out what to do. Well, look at who they went after. They went after Luke Fickell. He didn't take the job. Dave Clawson was contacted and said, no, no, thanks. I'm good at Wake Forest. They offered the job to Mel Tucker. He turned it down. They fattened the offer, and then he took it. And that's worked out very well for them. He's got a big old fat contract now after a great season this season, did great in the transfer portal last year. And so I think you look at that hire, and then you look at Kansas had to do this last year where they wound up with Lance Leipold, who I think wound up being a very good fit at Kansas. It's a hard job. We don't know how many games he's going to win, but he certainly seems like he's a good fit for that program, for what that program needs right now. And I wonder if being the only ones in the market made it easier. Now with Auburn, there will be coaches who want to coach at Auburn. Hugh Freeze would take the job now. That's one of those. Auburn has to decide if they want to deal with the PR hit of hiring Hugh Freeze, because it's not just the NCAA stuff with him. Obviously, they did hire Bruce Pearl to coach basketball, who had an NCAA show cause, and Bruce Pearl has the Tigers #1 in the country. As I record this, they're playing Arkansas. So I don't know if they're going to win this game, but they're still one of the best teams in the country. And everybody loves Bruce Pearl there. They just gave him a brand new contract that they believe will keep him locked in until he retires. So that part of the Hugh Freeze equation, I don't think they would have an issue with. The reason he got fired at Ole Miss ultimately, he's calling basically escorts on the road. That was found through phone record searches that were done during all that period where he was being investigated, and Houston Nutt was trying to get Ole Miss to apologize, and Houston Nutt's lawyer found all this stuff. That part, Auburn would have to deal with the PR hit on that. And the question is, would they be willing to? And at this point, Auburn's reputation is not great. We're talking about them like they're the most dysfunctional place in America. So I don't know that would be as big of an issue. Bill Clark at UAB knows the landscape there, was a high school coach, would understand how to recruit there. You got to level up. Can you get the kind of players that Kirby Smart, that Nick Saban, that Jimbo Fisher, that Brian Kelly will be after? That would be the big question. I think that would be the question if you're talking about like a Jamie Chadwell from Coastal Carolina, who's been successful in the South at multiple levels, but has never had to coach at the Power 5 level, never had to recruit at the Power 5 level. So those would be questions. Jeff Grimes is a name that's come up. He's a former Auburn offensive line coach. He's the offensive coordinator at Baylor now, was the OC at BYU when Zach Wilson was lighting everything up. He's one that his name, I think, would pop up if this thing opens. So I think there would be a pool. Would it be as big of a pool as if it was, say, Oklahoma? No. I think Oklahoma is a very aligned place. I know I wrote this column about Auburn, and I looked in the comments section, and they said, oh, it's all about recruiting. It sounds like Ari Wasserman. And then the next person said, no, it's Andy because it used the word alignment. And I know I use that word a lot, but it's important to these coaches. It's important to good football. Like, the reason Ohio State is always good is because everybody pulls in the same direction at that place for the most part. Oklahoma, generally everyone pulls in the same direction. Texas, they don't all pull in the same direction. It's quite obvious they don't. And you've seen what that does to a place. Auburn, same thing. And I think that produces that roller coaster effect at Auburn. But the difference between Auburn and some other places is that Auburn has gotten to the mountaintop fairly recently. I mean, they won the national title in 2010. They played for it in 2013. There's no reason to think they can't get back there. And, I do think ultimately this is about recruiting. And the highest ranked player in Auburn's class would have been the 18th highest ranked player in Alabama's class. And this is supposed to be your best recruiting class, your second class, your first full cycle class. Nick Saban, when he was at Alabama, landed probably the best recruiting class of all time in his first full cycle class, the 2008 class. And he just lost Louisiana Monroe. So that's I think the deeper issue. So that will be a priority as they're looking. And, it'll be interesting to see what they come up with. But I do think probably just go ahead and try to hire the permanent coach. It's not July. You're not about to start camp. You need to get somebody in time for spring practice, but you can do that. And is it going to be awkward? Yeah, but you already made it awkward. So you may as well just go the full awkward and deal with it. I think that's doable, and I think there would be a decent enough pool. Look, every coach who would want a big time SEC job, and there's a lot of coaches who would want that. Not every coach is going to want Auburn because of the dysfunction that you are seeing play out publicly. But a lot of them will. Most of them will. There will be good options if they wind up having an opening, which it sure sounds like they will. So, uh, Wiley, if I was giving them advice, and they certainly don't want any advice from me, I'm sure, but I'd say if you're going to do this, don't do the interim thing. Go ahead and just hire. Got a question from Real BBBBB on Twitter. I think I might have given him too many B's, one too many B's. 4 B's. Real B B B B. There we go. Why don't ADs construct a contract so that if a coach doesn't meet some metric, either recruiting ranking, NCAA rules violation, etc., they get fired with only a percentage of the total buyout? Right now, a coach gets the entire buyout or nothing unless he agrees to negotiate, which is dumb. In other words, rather than Harsin getting $18 million or nothing if they find cause, why wouldn't an AD do a contract where a coach loses some portion of the buyout if he doesn't do X or if he does do Y? So this implies that writing a contract is a unilateral thing. It's not. There's two parties here. And Bryan Harsin had leverage when he got the Auburn job. So Russ Campbell and Patrick Strong, his agents had some favorable leverage to work with. They didn't have to just take any old deal. There are cases where a coach has to take just any old deal, but Bryan Harsin did a good job at Boise State. And then Auburn had tried to hire Billy Napier, had kicked the tires on Brent Venables. Both of them, for the reasons I just talked about, the alignment issues, decided not to go there or not to engage further in conversations about the job. So, Russ and Patrick know this. They're not dumb. They're good agents. And they're going to use that to get more for their guy. And so this is not the full amount of Bryan Harsin's contract. The buyout number you've seen thrown around is a percentage of what's remaining on Bryan Harsin's contract. And buyouts can be structured in different ways. There are fully guaranteed contracts. We've definitely talked about that with Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M. That is completely fully guaranteed. Brian Kelly is fully guaranteed with LSU, I believe. Mel Tucker's contract with Michigan State is fully guaranteed. James Franklin, his contract with Penn State, I believe, is 85% guaranteed. So if he were to be fired, 85% of the remaining amount of the contract would be owed to him. So it's really what the two sides can agree upon, and you can raise the buyout number and lower the salary. You can raise the salary and lower the buyout. It's really about what you want. And a good example of that is after the 2020 season, Dan Mullen sits down with Scott Strickland at Florida. And Dan Mullen's coming off an SEC East championship. They didn't win the Cotton Bowl, but they had won New Year's Six Bowls the previous 2 seasons. So Dan Mullen's talking raise. And Jimmy Sexton, his agent, sits down with Scott Strickland, and they go through the deal. And Dan Mullen was making $6 million on his first contract. And so the discussion is, okay, how much more are you going to give him? And Strickland said he'd be willing to give $1.5 million more per year if the buyout didn't change. And the buyout, this one, was structured differently. These buyouts are not all structured the same. Like I said, some are fully guaranteed, some are a percentage, some are a flat rate, some have different payout structures. The Kevin Sumlin one at Texas A&M is a famous one because Trace Armstrong, his agent, had written into the contract that you had to, I believe it was within 30 days of firing, might have been within 60 days of firing him, but within a relatively short time of firing him, you owed him the entire amount that you owed him. And so if you owed him $20 million, it wasn't that you got to spread that out over a period of years. It was you're going to write a check for $20 million right now. And so that's a big reason why Kevin Sumlin was fired after 2017 and not after 2015. And the Dan Mullen one was written in a very interesting way. It was, if you fire Dan Mullen in the first period of this contract, you owe him $12 million. Whether that's after the first year of the deal, the second year of the deal. The only time it changed was when the amount remaining on the contract was less than $12 million, which would have been into the next to last year of the contract. At that point, they would have owed the full amount, which would have been less than 12 million. So Dan Mullen's buyout actually worked against him in 2021. So they take the deal because the issue was, Strickland says, I'm going to give you this much more money, but the buyout stays the same. They could have said, we'll take less money, but we'd like a different buyout. We'd like a higher percentage buyout or a percentage buyout that gives you more security if you get fired earlier rather than just a flat fee that you're going to get this year or this year or this year. And so they took the more money in salary. The buyout remained the same. And then last year, when things start to go wrong, Florida's administration looks at this and goes, okay, so it costs us $12 million to fire him this year, or it costs us $12 million to fire him next year, or it costs us $12 million to fire him the year after that. See, if he had a fully guaranteed contract or an 85% guaranteed contract, that number's going down significantly with each passing year. The fact that it was the same this year or next year or the next year actually hurt him, I think, because then the financial incentive to keep him goes down. And so that's the issue. It really depends on how much leverage you have, what you want in the deal. And look, I don't blame Dan Mullen for signing that deal. Things were going really well at Florida. The idea of getting fired, in 2021 probably never even crossed his mind. And he's like, oh, well, $1.5 million raise? Yeah. Or sorry, $1.5 million raise? By all means, bring it on. So I get it. I understand completely why he makes that deal, but it did wind up working against him. And it's really all about how much leverage each side has. And we make fun of the ADs for getting knocked in the creek on a lot of these things, but sometimes you see them use their leverage. You saw Ward Manuel use his leverage with Jim Harbaugh, not this year, but last year when there was no NFL interest in Jim Harbaugh. Michigan didn't feel like it had a savior on the horizon, but they didn't really need to give Jim Harbaugh a ton of money. And Jim Harbaugh had 1 year left on his deal, so he needed to get something done to recruit. And so they basically said, look, we'd have to pay you $8 million to fire you right now. So instead of that, we're going to give you a new contract that goes longer, and we'll give you a $4 million salary, heavy incentives, so that if you win big, you get money, which he did get quite a bit and then gave it to charity. But there's only a $4 million buyout. So essentially, they put themselves on the hook for $8 million, which is exactly what they would have spent had they fired him. So I thought that was a good case, a good example of a school using the leverage it had when the coach didn't have a lot. But a lot of times the coaches have a lot of the leverage, and a lot of the leverage comes from there being competitors in the marketplace who might hire them. This gets back to the first question. There are fewer competitors in the marketplace. Really, if you're talking to a sitting head coach, let's say, you're Auburn and you've got an opening, like, I don't know, at the end of this week, you're talking to a sitting head coach. Well, the only other school you're competing with is the one they're at. You're not really competing with anybody else. So that is a little bit less leverage. So I don't know if that winds up being a different contract, because of the issues at Auburn, I think they're probably going to have to give somebody a pretty sweet deal. I mean, look at what Michigan State had to give Mel Tucker. And the deal he's got now is unbelievable. But the deal he got before was pretty great. He was at Colorado, and he said no. And then they came back and more than doubled his salary. And more importantly to him, more than doubled his assistant coach salary pool. And at that point, he couldn't say no to that. And so, it's possible that's what goes down in this situation, but we'll have to see what happens. I'm fascinated by the whole thing. It's crazy that it was this public. It didn't have to be this public. I mean, if this doesn't go public, if Jay Gouge, the Auburn president, doesn't say, hey, look, we got to make a decision on this guy. If that doesn't go public, then I don't think there's an issue with Harsin coming back. If this is just kind of a message board rumor and nothing more, then Harsin can come back and coach, and you don't have to pay him $18 million. But at this point, you really can't bring him back. You've kneecapped him in recruiting, although if you look at his class, he kind of kneecapped himself. But I don't know that there's a solution going forward between those two parties. I think probably going to have to separate, and then we'll see what happens from there. Next question is from Doug. I'm a Kent State alum who's starting to go to some out of conference road pay games, basically the big money games where Kent State gets paid to come in and hopefully lose. The home team is hopefully paying for a win there. My choices for 2022 are Washington, Oklahoma, and Georgia. How would you rank them as far as the football atmosphere and the tourism angle, food, etc.? What a great trio of choices. Can you do all three? I realize that might be kind of expensive, but if you could do all three, by all means, do it. Doug went to Texas A&M in 2021, so I'm sure he had a great time in College Station. Before I say this, all of these are medalists. They're all on the podium. If we're watching the Olympics, they're all on the podium. So I have to rank 1-1 and 1-2 and 1-3, but they're all really good options. So you can't go wrong, Doug. We'll start there. I would say because you went to Texas A&M in 2021, you should probably have Oklahoma number 3, because the atmosphere is going to be a little bit less crazy version of that. Norman's a great college town. It's really kind of, at this point, the way OKC has grown, Norman's kind of an exurb of Oklahoma City. So it's part of a big city, really. And it's a nice stadium. The people are wonderful. They love the Sooners. They get loud. The other two are pretty unique, though. So that's the part where I'd say, because you've been to A&M, you've been to that kind of part of the world, and you've seen kind of an amped up version of what you get at Oklahoma. I don't know that you would want to do that again. You might want to go for something a little bit different. Washington is very different. Like you're not going to find a more beautiful setting for a stadium right there on the lake. I mean, it is so gorgeous. The sailboats out there, you are right there. You don't, until you go there, you don't really appreciate just how beautiful that setting is, and really just how beautiful that city is. Seattle's amazing. It is on the water. It is, carved into a lot of different isthmuses, and there's different bodies of water that you're dealing with. So that when you're driving around, it's gorgeous. There are mountains. You're going to see Mount Rainier as you're flying in, and it's really cool. It's not an SEC type atmosphere in terms of the game itself, but Washington fans are great. Washington fans get after it. Now, Washington fans and Oregon fans, I'd say, are probably the most faithful, passionate fans in the Pac-12. And so I think that would be great. And then, in terms of the food scene, you get all of Seattle. It's a major American city with a vibrant food scene. Obviously, the sushi. I found a place called Sukushinbo the last time I was there, which is one of those, doesn't really have a sign. You can call, but they probably won't answer the phone, and you just sort of stand there and wait and see if you can get a seat at the sushi bar. But it was amazing, and that was fun. And obviously, you can go down and go down to Pike Place Market, and there's so much cool stuff in that town. I went and found, I went out into the suburbs and found some breweries, and there's so much there. So you could plan a pretty packed weekend in Seattle. So I think that's a good one. And then Athens, I've on record as saying I think Athens is the best college town in America. A game at Stanford Stadium is unbelievable. You walk up to the place, and it's dug into the ground, so you don't realize how big it is until you really get on it. And you're like, whoa, this is 90,000 people. It's loud. It's incredible. If you can stay in Athens, I suggest it. There's some great bars. Go see Kelly, who makes great jerk chicken over by the Butts-Mehre complex, which is where the Bulldogs practice. That's one of my favorite places. The building's falling down, but it's awesome. And then you've got a bunch of really great restaurants like Farm Cart. 5 and 10. Hugh Atchison is the chef there, who's a very well known chef. There's a lot to do in Athens. And then if you, let's say you either can't get a room in Athens or it's just too rich for your blood, you stay in Atlanta. And pick a neighborhood in Atlanta that you think is cool that you'd like to explore, because you will find great restaurants in Atlanta as well. So I think that one I think would be my number one, because the game experience itself, you're going to be blown away, especially as happy as they are now coming off the national title. But the town itself, if you're going to go bar hopping, if you're going to go find some live music, it's a really great place to go spend a weekend. So I guess I would have to rank it. And again, remember, they're all on the podium here. Georgia 1, Washington 2, Oklahoma 3. Next question comes from Chris. Can you tell us about your journey to playing at Florida? Did you have scholarship offers from other schools? Why did you choose to be a walk-on for the Gators over going to a smaller school where you could have earned more playing time? And play is a relative term. I was a human tackling dummy at Florida. I did not get to play. And they were very smart not to play me, because I was not very good and I was very small. I was a 6'3", 240-pound guard. That ain't getting it done in the SEC. So why was I there? It's interesting, because I didn't really think anybody was going to want me to play football in college until maybe the end of my junior season in high school. I was not, recruiting was a little bit different there. Then this was the mid 90s, but we had guys on our team who were very, very good. The year before I graduated, we had Scott Bryan was one of our offensive linemen. He was recruited by almost everybody. I believe he had over 75 scholarship offers. He actually did sign with Florida. Lockie Travalos was one of our defensive linemen. He signed with Georgia. We had guys sign with UConn. So we were a recruited school. And I went to Lake Mary High School in suburban Orlando. And I didn't realize anybody might even want me until the end of my junior year, when an Air Force assistant coach named Cal McCombs pulled me out of class and sat me down in the guidance counselor's office and said, "Hey, have you ever thought about playing football at a service academy?" And I was like, I hadn't even thought about playing football in college. I don't even, why would anybody want me? I wasn't even supposed to be the starting right tackle on my team my junior year. The guy who was supposed to start had broken his hand, and I had taken over the job in game one and wound up starting the rest of the season. So, but I didn't think it would lead anywhere. And so when he's going through this, he's like, "Look, size wise, you fit the profile of an offensive lineman in a triple option." And I was like, "Okay." And then I went home and told my parents, and I was ready to sign right then. And my dad's like, "You checked out the service commitment, right? You're talking like 6-7 years in the Air Force, right?" And I was like, "Yeah, they're gonna let me fly fighter jets, right?" And no. You're way too big to fly fighter jets. Nobody's putting you in a fighter jet seat. So Air Force kind of dropped off after that. But I did have several schools recruited, several smaller schools. The Citadel was in contact quite a bit. The Ivy League schools were in contact. I had pretty good grades. And it was interesting because this was about, I think it was, at this point, it would have been 2 or 3 years after the Ivies had stopped giving athletic scholarships. They had decided as a conference that they weren't going to give an athletic scholarship anymore. And I remember the fullback from our rival high school had gotten a scholarship to Harvard in the last year of athletic scholarships in the Ivies. And I'm thinking, man, full ride to Harvard. Because I would have jumped all over that, obviously, if that had been available to me. But it wasn't. It was basically, you filled out the FAFSA form, and whatever federal aid you qualified for is what you would get. And then you'd have to figure out how to pay for it. And so I had those schools on me. And it was interesting because you never know who you're going to, who's going to call your house. I mean, I remember picking up the phone, and it was a voice on the other end, and it sounded like someone who grew up in an Italian family. And Andy, this is James Anarumo from Harvard. And I was like, "Wait, Harvard? Really? You guys want to talk to me?" And it's just like, it is sort of mind blowing. But then you realize, okay, that they're just looking for players, and who do you hit it off with? And my parents basically said, pick one of the teams in the Ivy League, because you had to pay to apply. Or sorry, not James Anarumo, it was Lou Anarumo. Should know the name because he's the Bengals defensive coordinator now. But he was very young. This is one of his first jobs, and so I I was just kind of my head was spinning because I didn't think, I'm just this kid in suburban Orlando. My parents were high school teachers. None of this seems real. But so I talked to the various ones. Penn was kind of the dominant program in the league, but Princeton had just won the league the season my senior year in college or in high school. They won the league in '95. And the coach that I hit it off with the best was a guy named Joe Susan, who went on to work with Greg Schiano at Rutgers and then became a head coach. And I believe he's back with Greg Schiano at Rutgers now. But he was the offensive line coach at Princeton. And he was my area recruiter, but he also would have been my position coach. So I was like, oh, this guy's awesome. And so, we decided I was going to apply to one of those. And so Princeton was the one I applied to. That's where I took the official visit. But they did their official visit. Some of their official visit weekends they did after signing day because, they were waiting to see if they could grab a guy who maybe thought he was going to get a scholarship to an FBS type school and didn't. And so that was the plan. But right before signing day, we got a call at my high school from Duke, and it was Joe DeForest was the assistant coach, and he wound up coaching at a lot of different places. He coached with Mike Gundy at Oklahoma State, and they said get an application in right now just to do. And I had already applied to North Carolina because North Carolina had at that time it was considered the best journalism school in the South. So, and the out-of-state tuition was not super expensive. So I had applied there, but didn't. I think I'd sent them a tape. I'd heard nothing from their football program. That was just like, I'm going to go there as a student. And I had actually taken a tour of Duke the previous spring break when I had gone to see North Carolina with my mom. And I was like, well, Duke was kind of awesome too. So, okay, we'll send in this application. And so that gets done. And I get I get the call after signing day. Hey, we'd love for you to walk on. My mom gets so mad because she thought they were going to give me a scholarship. And this is pre-Rivals, pre-24/7. So we don't really know a whole lot about recruiting. We know what my high school coaches are telling us. And we thought there was a chance that I might get a scholarship to Duke, which, I mean, shoot, if Duke would have offered me a scholarship, I would have taken it in a heartbeat. But that was not to be. They wanted me to walk on. And I'm like, guys, do you know how expensive it is to walk on at Duke? You charge a lot in tuition. And so that was kind of what it came down to, because I had these walk-on opportunities. There were smaller schools I probably could have gone to, but I had basically decided I want to go to a bigger school. I thought I was better than I was. Let's be perfectly honest here. I thought I was good enough to play at a Power 5 type school. I learned at Florida that I was wrong, but we'll get to that part of the story later. And so I sent my applications out. I got accepted to the schools I applied to. I applied to North Carolina. I applied to Duke, Princeton, Vanderbilt, Miami, and Florida. Vanderbilt and Miami, there were some scholarship programs that I qualified for that would have paid about half of it. So I'm just trying to figure out what I want to do. I think I sent a tape to Vanderbilt, didn't hear anything back. Didn't actually send a tape to Miami, but that probably would have been a good time because all their NCAA stuff was about to happen and they were going to need walk-ons. So that probably would have been a place I could have walked on. But again, probably same thing happens when I'm on the practice field, like, ooh, look at all this. So get to spring break of my senior year and I'm trying to figure out what to do. And I already knew I wanted to do this for a living. I had known since I was about 12 years old I want to get into this business. But at the time, there was no this business. Like, I didn't know that I'd have a podcast or that I'd work for The Athletic. I never thought I'd work for Sports Illustrated. That was not something real people did. I just assumed I'd go work for some newspaper somewhere. I'd cover high school sports for like 10 or 15 years. And then maybe I'd cover a college. And maybe when I was older, they'd make me a columnist. And if I was lucky, I might make 45 grand a year. And so I didn't think about what it would cost, and so when the financial aid stuff started coming in, and I started seeing how much I'd have to pay if I wanted to go to Princeton or if I wanted to go to Duke or somewhere like that, I just said I can't do this because at the time University of Florida was offering really good deals to in-state kids who had good grades and good test scores. And so the deal they offered me basically covered tuition, covered room and board, and then they cut me a check. So they were going to pay me to go to school, and it didn't make sense. Like if I didn't know what I wanted to do, if I thought, okay, I might go to law school or I might try to go to med school or something like that, maybe I go to one of those other ones. But I knew what I wanted to do. I didn't want to be saddled with loans my whole life. So I remember I was in my room during spring break. It was a weekend day, and I closed the door and I took a nap, and I woke up and I walked out and I told my mom, I guess I'm going to Florida. And that was that. And so the football part of it came later. Jim Collins was the guy who recruited my area for Florida, and so my dad worked at a different high school than the one I went to. So when Jim Collins went to that high school, they gave him the hard sell on me, and when he went to my high school, my coaches gave him the hard sell on me. And so they said, yeah, fine, send us a tape, whatever. Come up and meet somebody. And so I during that summer I went by and met one of the coaches, one of the assistant coaches, who explained what the walk-on process would be like, and then get there. And then I did the tryout. Jamie Spironis, Steve Spurrier's right-hand man, runs the walk-on program. They take you through some drills over, I can't remember if it was over 2 days or there were 2 sessions, and then they bring you back in the next day. And I remember sitting in there, and I was in there with one of the other guys I tried out with, and assumed he was making the team because he was a big old dude. He ended up not making it. I go in there, and Jamie Spironis gives me the Rudy speech. Like, if you've seen the movie Rudy, when they're standing there and they're about to do their walk-on tryout, and the assistant coach goes, your greatest value to the team is we don't care if you get hurt. Like, they give you that speech. And then, you go down there, get fitted, and you're out at practice. And it took about 5 minutes of practice for me to realize, oh my gosh, those coaches who evaluated me correctly. I am not good enough to be out here. These guys are amazing. Like, you walk out there, Javon Curse is standing there with his shirt off. Like, it's not, you're not really, like, us normal folks aren't the same species as a guy who is going to be a first-round draft pick and be a feared NFL edge rusher. And at that time, he was still a linebacker, and he'd been a safety when he signed. So it was amazing, but it was very educational. And I can't thank everybody there enough for treating me so well. The one thing people always ask is how do they treat the walk-ons? They treat the walk-ons any differently than the scholarship guys? I only know my experience, but in Steve Spurrier's program, once you were on the team, you were on the team, and it became a meritocracy. Like, there were no politics after that. It didn't matter if you were a scholarship guy or a walk-on. If you could play, you could play. And there were guys in my walk-on class who could really play. Like Alex Willis, Florida fans will remember that name because he became a scholarship receiver and did contribute later in his career. Like, I didn't realize he was a walk-on for the first few days. I just thought this dude's a scholarship guy, but he'd fallen through the cracks and it had to walk on. So it was a very educational experience, and I'm glad I did it. I think it has helped inform what I do as a reporter covering the sport, understanding what some of these guys are going through, what those lifts feel like at 6 a.m, what those runs feel like. And I'm very grateful I got a chance to do it, because I probably wasn't good enough to be there, but I do appreciate it. All right, let's go to the next question. This one's a fun one, and we go back to Doug. Doug is our Kent State alum who's trying to pick where he wants to go. What is your ideal barbecue plate? And in parentheses, he put meats, sauces, sides, and desserts within reason, because as much as we'd all love to eat everything, that's not always possible. This is a great question. This came up last week. A bunch of us were in Mobile for the Senior Bowl, and Trevor Sikkema, who works for Pro Football Focus, funny guy, great dude. He's got a policy at barbecue joints. He tweeted about this, and He went to Dreamland, which is that's in Mobile. You go to Meat Boss, you don't go to Dreamland, but he went to Dreamland, and he reminded me of his policy with this tweet is 3 sides minimum. Which, if you know anything about Dreamland, like that is no. They just started doing sides when they started franchising. Like the original Dreamland in Tuscaloosa used to be known as you can get ribs or you can get white bread or just ribs. Like the side is they're going to hand you a loaf of white bread and you can just sop up some sauce with it. So barbecue sides, unless they're great, are unimportant. So the ideal barbecue plate is as many meats as possible. If you're in Texas, you probably want to try the Trinity. This would be brisket, pork ribs, and sausage. And that's what the folks in Texas will tell you, that the true measure of a barbecue joint in Texas is those 3 things and how well they do those 3 things. And there's a lot of places in Texas that just don't put much thought into size. Like they may have a pot of beans sitting there and some coleslaw. The newer places, I think, have gotten a little bougier and put more emphasis on sides. But and I would go for those 3 things in Texas because it's the Trinity. Less sausage anywhere else. Sausage isn't my favorite of the barbecue meats anyway, but especially if you leave Texas, it's just not as high on the importance list for most pit masters. So, like if you're in the deep South, you got to do pulled pork. Like you got to, and preferably a pulled pork sandwich. That's the preferred barbecue delivery method in a lot of the southern states. So now, if you're North Carolina, you're doing the whole hog chop pork thing, but that's a completely, Eastern North Carolina is a completely different animal. So I would say if you're at a more standard barbecue joint, if I'm in Texas, I'm doing the brisket. If I'm not in Texas, I want to see the brisket before I order it because there's a really good chance it's not worth ordering. Pork ribs, almost always. If they do a beef rib, well, also you probably want to look at the brisket too, but look at the beef rib. If you find a good beef rib, which again, usually in Texas, get that. But I'd say pork ribs and pulled pork in most deep South places that you want to definitely try. And then if a place is famous for its chicken or famous for its turkey, then go for that. But load up on the meats. It's good. All the keto people love you. Sides, if they matter to you, or if they're really great, then go for it. Like if you're at Southern Soul in St. Simon's Island, Georgia, you're getting Brunswick stew. They make some of the best Brunswick stew. If you're at Bees Crackling Barbecue in Atlanta, you're getting hash and rice. Now, hash and rice is one of those things that if I say that to someone who isn't from the state of South Carolina, they have no idea what I'm talking about. They're like, corned beef hash? No, hash and rice is its own thing. And so like my relatives would sit around a pot for all night. They make hash and, so they have a big old like oar that you'd use for a canoe and stir the hash all night. And then you pour it over rice. And so you find that it's a lot of the stuff that's just kind of left over from the pig. And it's delicious. It is probably my favorite barbecue side. And if you go to some of the places in South Carolina, you'll find it. South Carolina is a very buffet based in the Midlands area, Columbia, down toward Charleston. They have more buffet action, and they'll have the hash and rice on the buffet, and it's pretty awesome. But Bees Crackling in Atlanta, and they originally started in Savannah. They make a great hash and rice. So you get the pulled pork there, and they do the hoe cakes, the corn cakes, and so get the pulled pork, put it between get extra hoe cakes and put it between the hoe cakes, and get the hash and rice, and you're done there. The ribs are good too, but you're going to be full and you're going to be happy. So I would say load up on the meats. Don't worry so much about the size. Don't worry about dessert. There are going to be places with good banana pudding. There are going to be places that have good pie that somebody brought in, but focus on the meat. And then if you got room for dessert, great, but don't let that distract you from what you're there for, which is being a carnivore. Hope that helps. Been a lot of fun. We got Stars Matter on the feed on Thursday. If there's any big breaking news, we'll, of course, drop an emergency podcast. And then Ari Wasserman joins for the Friday show. He's having a week now. Ari Wasserman, his mind has been blown by the whole Lincoln Riley, the hatred from Oklahoma people, and the idea that moving to Los Angeles would be preferable to living in Oklahoma. Ari believes that everyone feels this way and does not understand that there are people who don't feel that way. We'll discuss that with him on Friday, and I guarantee you it will be hilarious. We'll talk to you then.